Once again, the state of Florida is in the news for the way that they're handling education of Black history and what has happened in America and how America has treated African Americans and descendants of slaves for a long time now. So, look, I want to be clear about something. This series is called Therapist Reacts, and I'm Elliot Connie. I'm a psychotherapist. I want to create content that responds to the news from a psychological perspective and what we hear as psychotherapists and try to make sense of this so that our mental health can improve. I have no desire to make every single story about something race related. That is not the point of this series. And as an African American, I fear that people are going to think like that's what's going on, which is not the case. When I decided to do this series, I said I'm just going to talk about what is going on in the news, regardless of what it is. I'm just going to lean into that truth. And it just so happens that in the first couple of days of doing this, there are several kind of racially charged stories that have been going on. And one of them is yesterday, the Florida Board of Education approved new standards on how they would educate students, middle school and high school students, about Black history. And it created a significant backlash because it includes the phrase. Now, this is surprising to me, and I'm gonna wanna break this down for you. It includes how slaves develop skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. So I wanna say something about this. And people always talk about like, don't play the victim and all this stuff. It's not about playing the victim, it's about reporting facts. It is wildly inappropriate to enslave someone, and then if that someone, or if that culture, or if that persons that were enslaved demonstrate resilience and resolve, and they get through that difficult thing and survive and thrive and rebuild and create and become something, it is wildly inappropriate for the enslaver to take credit for that. And that is what is happening here in this story. It is wildly inappropriate for the enslaver culture, the people that were doing the enslaving, to say, look at how they've come out of that. Wonderful, they did a good job, and say that they did things to benefit themselves. The people that were enslaved had to do those things. Like, they had to demonstrate resolve. They had to demonstrate their strength in order to get through such a difficult thing. Now, the state of Florida defends this, and I'm going to play a little clip so you can hear what the state of Florida is saying in response.
Students should be allowed to learn the full truth of American history. Now, the new standards require instruction for middle school students to include, listen very closely, they want to include how slaves developed skills in which some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Now, Florida Department of Education, Florida Department of Education said in a statement, "We are proud of the process that the department took to develop these standards, and any attempt to reduce slaves to just victims of oppression fails to recognize their strength and courage during a difficult time." They say that Florida students deserve to know how slaves took advantage of the circumstances they were in to benefit themselves. Now, Andrew Spar, the president of the Florida Education Association, disagrees.
So here's something that I agree with in that particular story, is I agree that we should not relegate slaves to just victims of oppression, but we should talk about their overcoming oppression as being a demonstration of human resolve and resilience, not be benefited from the skills they learned in slavery. That is such a poor way of explaining that. I'm going to use an example to demonstrate this. Like, if you're a child and you've been victimized by physical abuse, no one would say you learned to take a punch and you learned skills from that abuse. Like, that is an inappropriate way to talk about it. Now, if someone goes through physical abuse in their childhood and they overcome that through their strength and their resilience, then they deserve credit for that. So if you want to tell the story, and as they talk about in this story, like, if you want to tell the whole truth and talk about how slaves overcame the oppression and built something wonderful and built an African-American culture and built a society, and they weren't able to be held down, then wonderful, tell that story. But don't tell it from the perspective of the enslaver. Tell it from the perspective of the strength demonstrated by the people that were enslaved. And I think that Florida is violating that here. I think Florida is crossing a line here that I think is wildly inappropriate. I also think this is a very important thing to note. And I've had this thought many times as I've watched these education standards and book bannings and those sorts of things going on in the state of Florida. And that I think, like when I was in school, and I'm in my mid 40s. So when I was in school, there was a time where the curriculum that the school had was my primary or even like the only way that I could gain education. And today we live in a society of Google and the internet and loads of different places to get information. And I think that we need to recognize that we have to empower our children by giving them the education that we think is important in the home. We have to be able to talk to our children about our history. And when I say our history, I mean like whatever culture you may come from. If you are an immigrant from whatever country, if you are an African American and the descendant of slaves, if whatever it is, like you have to be able to talk to your kids about the culture that is going on. And to go back to like the psychotherapy impact of this, there is a tremendous strength that can be attended to when a young African American sees how far Black culture has come. And the only way to talk about that is to actually talk about the impact of slavery and talk about the strength and resolve demonstrated by the people who went through that slavery. We cannot talk about it as they learned skills. That is an inappropriate way to talk about that. And as I use that example of, like, you wouldn't talk about that as somebody who's a survivor of abuse. You wouldn't talk about they learned skills. You would talk about they demonstrated strength and resilience. That's a way of complimenting that society and making it feel good to be a part of that society. That's a way of lifting people up, is by talking about how they got through something difficult. It is wildly inappropriate to describe it in such a way that they learn skills, because that makes it sound like slavery wasn't so bad. That makes slavery sound like employment, and that is not true. Slavery created death and carnage. It ravaged cultures. Sometimes I talk to my European friends and they will tell me, like, my family goes all the way back to whatever country in Europe, and they can trace themselves back to the 1200s. And I have no idea what society on the continent of Africa my people are from. I have no clue, because they were captured and brought here against their will and held in bondage. And we have to be able to tell that whole story. And we have to be able to talk about how, even though that had happened, it didn't hold down African American culture, and African Americans have continued to thrive and contribute to this wonderful and amazing country. But somehow this wonderful, amazing country, every now and then, slaps us in the face and continues to remind us that there's an important fight left to be had, and that important fight includes being able to tell the story in an appropriate way, and this is inappropriate. So the impact is, it's long lasting. Like, we've got to be able to tell that story. Children have to grow up knowing that slavery was really bad, and it had nothing to do with like skills people could learn to apply in their lives. That's just not what it was about. So I think Florida has made a mistake here, but I think it's a mistake that's correctable. A, by getting out and voting for the type of people that will be compassionate and not put their political aims above human kindness. And B, teaching our kids in the home what is important to you culturally. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on social media. If you enjoyed this video, share it, like it, and hit that notification bell once you subscribe so you get more notifications